Stand up, you've been sitting way too long.
Welcome to this special edition of the Ralph Nader Radio Hour. I'm Steve Scrovan. In this series, Ralph and constitutional scholar Bruce Fein will lay out articles in the impeachment of President Donald J. Trump. Count 3, Contempt of Congress.
Bruce Fein, briefly, why did the founders place that authority in Congress?
The framers, again, were very suspicious of executive authority. Remember, their persecutors, when we were still colonies, was from King George III. It wasn't so much Parliament. And the purpose of giving this power of Congress was to ensure complete oversight, transparency in the executive branch. We know the executive branch prospers in secrecy. So power was given to Congress, plenary power, to demand that executive officials come, testify under oath, bring whatever documents are necessary to ascertain not only if the executive is engaged in wrongdoing, whether there are new laws that may be needed, whether laws are not being adequately enforced, whether they just want reassurance that the law is being complied with. Remember that the greatest danger that was feared of our government was executive tyranny, not legislative tyranny in Congress. And the power of the Congress to exercise this plenary power was recognized very early, a case called Anderson and Dunn, by the United States Supreme Court, which basically has said repeatedly the congressional power of contempt is like a judicial power. If someone doesn't come to testify, they could immediately put them in jail, fine them, do other things to overcome that recalcitrance.
It's important when you use the phrase plenary power in Congress based in the Constitution. Once the formal impeachment process starts by the House of Representatives, they don't need to go to the courts at all. They can decide the impeachment articles, send it to the Senate without any resort to the courts. So how has Donald Trump violated this authority placed in the Congress that leads to the charge of contempt of Congress?
But just as a quick background, in fact, one of the articles of impeachment against President Nixon that was voted by the House Judiciary Committee was his refusal to comply with a subpoena. And that refusal wasn't as a result of any court order. It's what you said, Ralph. The House itself decides that's impeachable, and he was required to respond. We don't need to go to court. Now, President Trump has ordered and instructed and worked with literally a dozen or more officials to refuse even to appear to oversight hearings of the Congress relating not only to the phone call with the president of Ukraine, but with regard to security clearances. He not turned over information relating to his tax returns as the statute requires, demanded by the House Ways and Means Committee. He's told his communications director, you can't testify, as former White House counsel, you can't testify with regard to the overall operation of the executive branch. There have been various officials who simply said, I don't want to answer questions. And none of this has ever been sustained by the United States Supreme Court.
What you're saying is he has defied numerous subpoenas issued
scores
by the House of Representatives.
Yeah, on a scale that's truly unprecedented, 4 or 5 in single days. Now, you remember this. It's important, I think, for an audience to try to think through this issue by analogy. If you, as a target of a criminal investigation, could tell the prosecutor which witnesses you could talk to, you probably wouldn't have very many convictions. I mean, the idea that the target of the investigation gets to decide the scope of the information available to the prosecutor is absurd on its face. The idea is, no, the prosecutor is entitled to every man's evidence. The burden of proof is on the prosecutor. The target has a right to defend, counsel, and things of that sort. But the defendant doesn't get to decide which witnesses get to be called to the stand, which is basically what is happening in the current, not only the impeachment inquiry, but other related inquiries as well that Congress has undertaken. He, for example, has resisted having grand jury material that's relevant to impeachment be submitted to the Congress, a grand jury material of the same sort that was used by the House Judiciary Committee in the Nixon impeachment, obtained from a grand jury run by then Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski. In all these efforts, the president is he's compromising the ability of the Congress to run a fair and thorough investigation of the executive branch to determine whether impeachment is warranted.
And the founding fathers would have seen this as a very grave impeachable offense because it goes right to the heart of concentrating power in the White House in defiance of the separation of powers and the authority given to Congress and only to Congress by our Constitution.
And that is count 3 in the impeachment of Donald Trump, contempt of Congress. Join us again for count 4, violation of the Emoluments Clause.